Good morning, good afternoon to our global audience. We are here today to talk about feminist journalism, a webinar organized by International Media Support. I'm Laura Gill, and I'm a program advisor at IMS. Before we continue, I want to tell you that we will have translation to Spanish and Arabic. Buenos días, buenas tardes a una audiencia global. Hoy vamos a hablar de feminismo, de periodismo feminista, un webinar organizado por International Media Support. Soy Laura Gil y soy asesora en IMS. Entonces, if you want to listen to the translation, just go to the globe you will see in the bottom part to the right of your screen, and there you will be able to choose the channels, Arabic or Spanish. Si quieren escuchar la traducción, pueden ir a la parte de abajo de su pantalla, a la derecha, donde encontrarán los canales árabe o español. So, as I was saying, we are here today to talk about feminist journalism. IMS is an organization, a Danish organization based in Copenhagen that works in 30 countries around four continents on safety of journalism, on defending freedom of expression, and as we like to say, on helping to pave the way for good journalism. So we are gathered together here today because we have a double occasion at IMS. We are launching our gender reader, a reader that gathers the best content that our partners have produced about gender, our issues around the world. And because we're launching a new gender strategy at IMS, and a strategy that I would use intersectional feminism as a lens to promote good journalism. So to do that, we decided to begin a series of discussions about feminist journalism. And we are joined here together with three specialists. Paul Amar, who directs the Center Orfalea at the University on Global Studies at the University of California in Santa Barbara. Diana Moukalled, who's a documentary filmmaker and the founder of a digital media outlet that specializes on feminist journalism. Paul joins us from California, Diana joins us from Lebanon, and joining us from Colombia, Fabiola Calvo, who is a doctor in political science and heads the Colombia chapter of the network of journalists with gender vision. I'd like to tell you that that you'll be able to ask questions if you use the Q&A feature that you will see at the bottom of the screen. We'll be reading the questions and trying to get our guests to answer on air. So before we begin with the discussion, I'd like to welcome Malin Palm, who's our colleague at IMS. She is the gender advisor at IMS, and she will give us a few words about the gender reader that we are launching today. Malin, you have the floor or you have the screen.
Thank you so much, Laura, and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you join us from. As Laura said, my name is Malin Palm, and I'm the gender advisor in IMS. I'm one of the organizers of this event here today, and one in the team behind the IMS reader on gender and sexuality that I have really the pleasure of launching today. IMS is convinced that media cannot be truly professional unless people of all genders, people from minorities, and disadvantaged groups are fully represented in media production, and that media is free from all stereotypical and degrading content. IMS has just these days launched its new strategy on gender equality in media development. recognizing that the feminist perspective is needed. It was a long process for us of thinking and discussing, during which we asked ourselves if there is such a thing as feminist journalism, and if so, how might it look like? So one way to start answering that question is to look at the media content that shed light on gender equality, gender-based oppression and discrimination. IMS works with 126 partner organizations in 24 countries in Latin America, Africa, Middle East, Asia, and partially Europe. And we already knew that IMS partners produce some really, really good content. So we started collecting pieces that were produced on gender and sexuality the past 5 years. And I have to tell you that what we found was truly mind-blowing. After hard work of choosing, we then took it down to 38 pieces of excellent journalism that address issues of gender inequalities and advance the feminist agenda in different parts of the world. We grouped them into themes that we believe categorize or capture the different forms of gender-based discrimination that is commonly seen in our countries, such as gender-based violence, sexual and reproductive health and rights, politics and economy, queer and masculinities, and women, peace and security agenda. This result is what you find in the reader on our website that is called Navigating a Changing World. You find there articles, documentary films, interviews, radio programs, TV programs, and podcasts in English as well as in the original languages. And they're all produced with such affection and sharpness, passion, as they address violations and resistance that occur as a consequence and a response to patriarchal society. There are some deeply upsetting and profoundly touching stories there, such as the story of young Isra Khalid from Palestine, who was brutally killed by her relatives, or that of 14-year-old Lorena, who along with so many more women and girls were forcibly disappeared during the war in Colombia. Some other stories break taboos. I would, for example, strongly recommend you to watch the short 2-3 minute videos on Marokkiat, where young brave women such as Nada, Khadia, Rihab talk about love, sex, and violence, and a lot of other stories that are commonly about, let alone in public space or in the media. Other stories on our reader use humor to contribute to and create awareness of serious problems, such as the Pakistani Sujag making fun of men's irrational fear of menstruation, an issue that limits women throughout their life. Or you can enjoy how the Arabic-speaking Al-Hudud used satire to highlight the absurdities of male patriarchal superiority. You can also choose to listen to some of the really encouraging and uplifting stories of women political leaders, peacemakers, and activists in the streets. Our hope with this collection, that is, of course, this was just very few examples of what is there. Our hope with it is that it will allow readers to learn more about the different issues of gender inequalities and the struggle for rights in different parts of the world. We hope it will inspire and motivate people to join the fight for equality and encourage people to continue the brave and good work that they are doing. We also wanted to show that although the specific issues that we face might be different depending on which country you are, which setting you are in, the feminist struggle actually connects us through the world because we are all fighting the underlying structural discrimination. And to do that, media is an excellent tool. Media has a unique ability to create awareness, to shape societal values, and to set the political agenda. So with this very short remark, an introduction to our reader, I would now like to hand back the screen to my dear colleague, Laura Gil, the distinguished speakers and guests today, and start today's conversation on feminist journalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Malin. At IMS, we asked Professor Paul Amar to read the Gender Reader, to go through the entire publication, and to provide us some thoughts on what we could see about feminist journalism there And Paul, we would like you to share what you perceive feminist journalism to be, and how that can help us produce social change in our societies. So, please, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura. And I'm really happy to be here. I began my career as a journalist for Africa News and for Cairo Times, and working for magazines about Latin America and in Brazil. So I enjoy, as an academic, returning to the field of journalism, especially in this new age of protest media, alternative media, social media, and the transformation of journalism through citizen and protest and engagement. So I really enjoyed this reader. I'm going to read some notes from my analysis because I really found that this provides a comprehensive mapping of a new way to imagine journalism and to center gender, sexuality, and new forms of sexual dissidence at the core of our notions of journalism and its role in the public sphere. So I found the IMS Gender Reader pioneers in contributing to social change by identifying new kinds of voices of intersectional feminist journalism in the Global South. The Gender Reader does this by brilliantly articulating important themes across the regions of the Global South. And among these themes, 3 or 4 stand out. One is it acknowledges feminist protest cultures, which have sprung up on a level of vitality unprecedented, in whether it's in Chile, whether it's in Colombia, Mexico, or of course across the Middle East, which this Gender Reader really focuses on, filling a gap. Second, it provides spaces for women's narratives around violence and security, but replacing the victim testimony format with alternative visions of the world, worlding visions, right? Ways to create a new world that centers gender and women's voices and protagonism, agency, rather than victimization. Third, it has a consistent thread that analyzes masculinities, manliness, and its relationships to sectarianism, to forms of nationalism that I think is incredibly timely right now in the middle of a moment of populist backlash, in which I think that deconstructing masculinity, abolishing forms of machismo, deconstructing patriarchy through the recovery and political radicalization of men as feminists is also incredibly important. And this provides Global South and new perspectives on how that can transpire and how journalism can play a key role in denaturalizing machismo and patriarchal masculinity. Also, I think throughout we have a new non-binary and queer trans approach to gender, which destabilizes the binary approach that feminism in previous generations was based upon, without destabilizing or undermining the subject of women as an important context of mobilization in these regions. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the very exciting protest cultures and street creativities that explode throughout these readings. I think this is reflecting this new era of protests, whether it's the Lebanese Revolution of 2019 or the new uprisings in South America, but they look back. They look back to the age of armed struggle in Colombia, to the masculinization, to the militarization of masculinities during the Lebanese Civil War. The reader creates space for protest movements as they're emerging now, and offers space to kind of street creatives or new forms of creative expression that are coming from these street protests and arts and public articulations, acknowledging them as new forms of journalism and groundbreaking public media content generators. We learn of how Al Hadoud, for example, generates satirical news media in Arabic that mocks the way mainstream media protects and encourages sexual harassment and assault by generating sex panics around women's public immorality and the supposed self-degradation of women when they participate in these massive new kinds of protests. So the satirical media picks up and enlarges the sphere in which the protest can be read as a new kind of collective journalism. The Gender Reader also translates and shares the richness of the platform of Marokiyat that Malin was mentioned before, which includes the voices of queer bisexual women, women facing harassment, and struggles around religious and social hypocrisy, but articulated again not through voices of victimization, but through voices that integrate pleasure, self-assertion, and political participation in the experiences of gender in contentious contexts. The reader introduces us to the work of Daraj Media, transmitting the voices of women, protest poets, and leaders in the Sudan. For example, the women poets and song leaders were very much the leaders of the 2019 uprisings and revolution in the Sudan that end up challenging militias and the militarized regime in that country. And here in the writings of this gender reader, we're given historical context and several teaching moments for how to understand new poetry coming out of the Sudan and the long history of women's struggles against British imperialism, against nationalism, against Islamism in their own autonomous voices, offering us a new gendered lens, not just for understanding women's issues in the Sudan, but the whole arc of African anti-colonial struggle through the voices of these women. So this is an example in which engagement with a particular set of activists centers the gender question, centers a new kind of journalism, poetic journalism, or poetry and chants as a new kind of public engaged journalism itself. So this is a way to recognize different kinds of voices coming out of the Global South, specific to the vernacular of women's struggle in this context, and arguing that this can be understood as a kind of journalism, as a kind of aesthetics of public knowledge production. So third, I think it's super important that here violence and questions of security, whether on the international level or in these regional contexts, in Colombia, in Lebanon, in Sudan, in Mali, across the Global South, are understood in a new language of narration that gets us beyond the limitations of human rights testimonies, which have frequently focused on the experience of women, but women only being represented as victims and not articulating the narratives according to their own terms, not articulating the spaces and the transit and travels that link Africa to the Mediterranean to Europe, link regions of women's struggle to them, to each other. So the reader provides crucial space for promoting social change, centering women and sexual minorities in the debates also around violence against journalists. We are introduced to El-Quds Al-Arabi's coverage of the sexual harassment and assault on more than half of the female journalists, for example, based in Kurdistan. We've all heard of the revolutionary feminist agenda of Kurdish militant brigades in Syria, but the coverage of gender justice and feminist concerns in Iraqi Kurdistan has been almost non-existent. So this gender reader addresses that important gap and gives us a profile of women journalists in Iraq and their mobilizations, particularly within the field of journalism, for an attention to women's promotion, to women's coverage of issues from their perspective, and also to the restructuring of the law in Iraq in order to recognize sexual harassment in the workplace. So this proves an example of how women journalists are, for one, reshaping what journalism means in the context of a newly emerging polity, but also are changing particular laws and structures within Iraqi Kurdistan. This brings a nice dialogue, I think, for the global debates around the revolutionary agendas of Kurdish feminists throughout the region, which is an important story that journalists constantly get wrong and neglect the subtleties and differences within these different spheres. So finally, let me skip to two more questions that I think are super innovative in this collection. The gender reader has a comprehensive approach to addressing masculinity and its relationship to new forms of militarized populism and nationalism that have spread throughout every region of the world. One of the highlights of this reader is its thorough exploration of hip-hop music as a form of alternative media and as quasi-journalistic intervention in the public sphere, particularly in the Maghreb, and particularly in relationships to different kinds of either resistant or revanchist reactionary masculinities. Journalist Reem Ben Rajeb presents a nuanced and inspiring report on hip-hop music in Tunisia in the wake of the 2011 revolution. Her feminist analysis engages with the reputation hip-hop has in Tunisia as a space for pure masculinity and as a form of dictionary of male authoritarianism. But she also underlines that there are several hip-hop groups in Tunisia that specifically advocate for gender inclusion and for a gender revolutionary justice paradigm, while also attacking the masculinist brutality of the police in Tunisia. So this is part of a continuity of thought that I worked on a lot in Egypt, of feminists, including queer feminists, who are struggling against police brutality and ally themselves often with these kind of popular forms of resistant masculinities. So finally, I think this gender reader also is catching the 21st century edge of a transformation in the language of feminism, centering a non-binary approach or a queer trans epistemology of how to think of gender and change. Here we have some of the most exciting new trans bloggers reporting from Egypt and their experience in prison, in the court system, in the gaze of new talk show media, as trans identities articulate their new positions in relationship to an authoritarian, increasingly authoritarian public sphere. And finally, we have an in-depth examination of trans performers and non-binary youth in Myanmar, another regime experiencing a military coup like Egypt, and where trans people again have become the spotlight of resistance to a new military authoritarian and masculinist nationalism. In Myanmar, the language around trans identity is heavily influenced not by a Western human rights paradigm, but by an indigenous religious tradition that understands trans people as being mediums for local spirits that mediate between the spiritual realm and the mundane world, bringing in religion in a way that doesn't repeat the cultural essentialisms of Orientalism and the way that human rights traditions often marginalize questions of religion and in relation to gender difference. So I felt that in bringing the new age of protest to the center of journalism and providing new space for how to think about masculinities, and then a new epistemology of gender journalism that's not just intersectional, but accepts a new binary and queer trans lens for approaching the media. The gender reader is super exciting, has a lot for us to offer. So thanks for letting me peruse it.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. And as you said, one of the interesting things about this reader is that although there are so many pieces based in the Middle East, it speaks to us globally. I love the fact that you concentrated on the hip hop piece, because that's a question we women ask ourselves all over the world, how to reconcile ourselves with hip hop. And this is pretty much it with all the pieces. You will see that it speaks to global issues. So if you would like to consult the reader, we just posted in the chat feature the link to the reader. Please visit the reader, it's worth it. I would like to acknowledge, I mean, this is Malin's idea, Malin Pop's idea, but Muna Bar, who's here with us today, worked along this project and put a lot of effort. So thank you, Mona, for being there with Malin and with me. I'd like to invite Diana Moukalled to speak to us about feminist journalism, because she's out there in the trenches doing it. And we would like to know what she thinks feminist journalism is and how it should be done. Diana.
Thank you so much. Well, I am a woman and I am a journalist and I am a feminist. So my journalism is informed by the fact that I am a woman and I am a feminist. We are never detached from the stories we cover. We get moved by events and stories happening around us. So putting feminist journalism into practice means applying the gender perspective as an analytical and transformational tool. We make sure that our stories challenge the mainstream narratives, challenge discriminatory norms, and raise issues onto the public agenda. We do that by covering very critically stories that should not be overlooked by media, and the public discourse, like the story of the TikTok girls, where we have two girls from Egypt sentenced to 10 years in prison for trying to be influencers on TikTok, and to find themselves accused of human trafficking. This story happened lately. The mainstream media and major public debate tend to demonize the girls. They are poor, they dared to be visible. So you have two factors that the mainstream media and the public discourse made them their prey. So we need to look at this story from a feminist perspective, simply because feminist perspective helps reveal and combat discourses built upon a system which discriminates not only against women, but also against everyone who does define themselves under the image of the dominant male role in patriarchal society. Feminist journalism is fighting impunity, hold decision makers accountable, and promote the rights of people of all genders. And this is what we try to do through Daraj and through alternative media. Making feminism visible in the media is the start of a committed, sometimes exhausting process that will shake up patriarchal mentalities and structures above and beyond inequalities between men and women. We must also make it clear that mainstreaming the gender perspective in the media benefits not just for communication product, but also people, the discussion around it. Feminist journalism opens up our perspective and provides tools for building a way thinking that enables us to progress towards a society of free people, where people can decide on the future, knowing that the media are their allies in the struggle, not the enemy. Mainstream media in the region, unfortunately, is the enemy sometimes. And by saying this, I would just like to speak about my personal experience. I was raised and nurtured that I have to be obedient as a girl, as a woman. I have to be obedient to the system, to my father, to my brother, and not to challenge, not to ask too much. So this idea of being obedient, we have been taught it as women, as people living in Lebanon or in the region. So being a journalist means that you have to challenge challenge the system and question the corrupt people. And also being a journalist, feminist journalist, means that you don't have to accept all of this. What we have been raised on, what we have been taught, we should reflect that. I want to reflect my experience as a woman who have traveled a lot in the region, who knows from inside what is it like to be discriminated against, why we don't have an equal role. I think it's my duty, it's my personal burden and fortune that this should be reflected in the media. And this is why, since the day one of founding of Daraj, we considered gender issues. Feminism is a major component of what we covered last week. And since we launched in 2017, we have a consistency in covering gender issues from a very critical point of view. It's not only just to cover it, we need to challenge and people to really discuss the issue without being afraid or feeling that they are intimidated. It's not easy, it's a long path, but this is something we are committed to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. I told you it was a digital media outlet. You can find it at www.daraj.com. It's DARAJ. And you will see many of the pieces in English. So I invite you to visit Daraj. It's everything Paul was talking about. So thank you, Diana. And now we will listen to Fabiola. Fabiola is sitting in Bogota. And she heads, as I said, she heads the network of journalists with gender vision. And in Colombia, in the past few weeks, we've seen protests where feminists have been taking the lead. We would like to listen to her, to listen to her vision of feminist journalism, and especially to ask her, to understand why there is such an awakening of the feminist movement today in Colombia and in around the world, and how that how that intersects with journalism. Fabiola, very welcome.
Bueno, muchas gracias por el espacio. Yo creo que estamos tocando aquí una serie de planteamientos, muchos aún en debate, y me parece que eso hace mucho más interesante lo que estamos haciendo. Para empezar, hay discusión si hay periodismo feminista o no, ¿no? Y justamente yo me he planteado por qué, si hablamos del periódico X, que tiene una orientación liberal, el otro tiene una orientación conservadora. Es decir, hay una filosofía, hay una línea editorial en cada uno de los medios, cualquiera que sea. ¿Por qué no puede haber dentro de esa línea editorial, como uno de los puntos, el que sea feminista, el que tenga al centro la defensa de los derechos de las mujeres, que tenga la defensa de los derechos de la población LGBTIQ, que tenga la defensa de los derechos de las mujeres u hombres trans? Es decir, en última instancia es que tenga al centro los derechos humanos con la lupa de lo que es el feminismo, porque el feminismo va mucho más allá, ¿sí?, de lo que nos planteamos solamente en el tema de igualdad en derechos. El feminismo es política, el feminismo es filosofía, el feminismo es pensamiento, es acción. Y eso es lo que hacemos. Y no hay un solo feminismo, hay muchos feminismos. Entonces habrá quien esté con el feminismo radical, habrá quienes estén, ya yo creo que el feminismo socialista, yo creo que se ha ido ampliando. También es cierto, tenemos que decir, el feminismo ha sido, ha tomado, ha bebido de otras fuentes. En este momento, por ejemplo, el tema de que esté tan activo realmente tiene una interacción permanente con el resto del movimiento social, con el resto, con las organizaciones y partidos políticos. El feminismo también se plantea el poder. Y los medios, vamos entonces al tema de por qué podemos y necesitamos hacer un periodismo feminista. En primer lugar, porque nos estamos planteando, partamos desde lo que fue 1789, los derechos, el derecho a la igualdad en derechos. Eso no lo hemos logrado. Hemos tenido una serie de conquistas, pero realmente quienes contribuyen en positivo pueden ser los medios. Los medios generan opinión, transmiten información, pero resulta que es que los medios también están orientados, dirigidos, y sus empresarios también son unos grandes señores patriarcas, porque las mujeres tampoco hemos tenido acceso a la posesión de los medios. Por eso esa atomización en este momento en lo que tiene que ver con la información. Es decir, hay una serie, no se nos escucha, se escucha distinto si la voz se multiplica desde un gran medio a cuando lo hacemos desde los medios alternativos. Eso tenemos que reconocerlo. Es un esfuerzo enorme. Las mujeres están creando ahora muchísimos medios alternativos, pero no les da para mantenerse, o no nos da para mantenernos. Y tampoco se multiplica la voz igual. Los medios, un periodismo feminista debe incluir no solamente los temas de las mujeres, ni los temas lo que tiene que hacer es transversalizar la información con un enfoque de género. Si hace esa transversalización, se estaría preguntando de qué manera afecta un hecho, cualquiera que sea, de una manera diferenciada a hombres y mujeres. Porque a veces da la impresión, quedándose solamente en lo que es la entrada.
Perhaps we're only stuck in getting there and trying to change O for A, and I'm speaking in gender, feminine and masculine in Spanish, and that's not just feminist journalism. That's just starting and knocking on a door to a path, but not walking the path. So we need to contextualize information, and we need to know this history of the women's movement and the participation of women in history. How have we contributed to massive changes that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for us? But we have been hidden. Those things have not been told. Those stories have not been told, and we have to do it. We have to do have to tell what happened before and what happens now. And right now, feminism is moving because this has been a word of mouth work. We have arranged and we have organized and we have demonstrated. And as we've talked about many feminisms, well, that has strengthened feminism as well. It's not just a unique, monolithic, homogenous way of thinking. If there's something that feminism is proud of, is diversity. And that's why we can talk not only about being cross-sectional with gender, but also we can be talking about being intersectional. And it's not the same to talk about an indigenous or Aboriginal woman, a Black woman, or a brown woman, or a white woman. That's not the same. The connotations are different. And a good journalist must be aware of that. And a good journalist, male or female, must give the voice to the leading character. She is the one who speaks. And this is something that makes us different from the rest of the mass journalism. We provide context and we know the story behind it. And women, we're not, as our colleague said, we do not want to be seen as victims in any scenario, in a good or bad story, in any story. We women are the players, the actors of that story. That is why it's urgent and necessary to know so as to provide context together with what we're presenting and with what's happening in the country where things are going on. In the case of Colombia, for example, the number of women that have organized themselves and women's organizations have grown exponentially. We are talking about popular women, the popular feminism. So there's a series of feminisms and a series of proposals that are coming up so that we can achieve our rights to keep and preserve the rights that we have won and to achieve the rights that we're still fighting for. And journalism plays a key role, first, by telling the stories about women that are never told. That's part of what we feminists do in media. We take what's untold to the pages and the mass media in general. Also, what we do is look at everything from the feminist lens. We analyze every piece of news with the feminist lens. And it's not only about women, of course, it's about wondering how certain things affect women and men differently. It is about understanding that when women participate, when women become stronger in terms of organization and rights, then we are contributing massively to democracy. Without them, without us, without our active participation, there is no democracy. It is not possible. So the media could not only give women's voice, because that's not enough, but they should give them the approach and the way to approach information and pieces of news. And also, it would be necessary to get to know what progress has been made so far. Many women do not know about the rights that they have, and media could really convey those rights so that women can actually exercise those rights. And also feminism. Well, I'm actually, mixing both questions, but feminism is very active right now because if we have rights, but we don't have a scenario in which we can actually exercise those rights, then what's the point? In Colombia right now, the fight is about the right to health. What what started social this this social situation was a tax reform, but that was just an excuse, a trigger for this social disruption, because there are no conditions to actually exercise our rights. I mean, the Constitution says you have the right to health, but how? We don't have the conditions. So women fighting on the front lines for those rights that have already been achieved and gained, but we need to be able to exercise them. So the media, instead of saying women broke the glasses of a building, they should be saying why those women are on the front line fighting for their rights. We need to go deeper into this. We need to go deeper into the facts and give them their voice.
Thank you so much, Fabiola. You asked a very interesting question, which is if a newspaper has no qualms about saying my editorial line is liberal, conservative, whatever, why don't we have more newspapers or media outlets saying my editorial line is feminist? Why? You'll be glad to know that here at IMS, we chose feminism as our guiding line of work to promote journalism, to work with our partners around the world. So let me remind everyone that you can send us questions in any of the languages. It doesn't matter. Just send in questions in your own language in the feature, the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We will take them. We'll receive one. We'll receive a few, actually. We'll get to those. I would like to throw one to begin the discussion before we go to the public's questions, to the audience's questions. There's one question that needs an answer, because that's what we get back when we talk about feminist journalism. That's what journalists tell us. Can feminist journalism abide by the same ethical and professional standards of journalism? In other words, can feminist journalism become militancy in a way that contradicts the pillars of professional journalism? So I'd like to, from each one of you, a few words on that, because I think that's the fundamental question about feminist journalism. I'd like to begin with Professor Amar. Paul, please.
No, I think this is a key question. I think if we include in journalism the broader multimedia, social media forms of citizen activist journalism, then I think we have to broaden our notion of what professional journalist norms and standards might be. I think we've been trapped in this polarized debate between fact-based investigative journalism that's fact-checked and that's governed by an accountability structure on the one hand, and then on the other hand, opinion media, which often is seen as ignoring or transgressing the norms of investigation and facts. But I think feminist journalism, queer journalism, and content production from activist social media is a new kind of, not exactly professionalism, but a new kind of rigor and new ethics of the public sphere. which includes obviously the personal and reshaping narratives, reshaping frames, providing new ways to think and new ways to see. If you have to invent a new language for talking about non-binary gender, for deconstructing masculinity, for reimagining the body, desire, pleasure, sex, you can't use the old language that has been used to describe these political and social phenomena. So you have to experiment. And that has to come from personal experience. It has to come from the social margins. So that will involve something that's more about the imagination than about fact at some points. But I think what's going to be really interesting in the next generation is how to imagine journalism that is accountable, that is politically responsible, but that is also creative and responds to the new imaginaries and utopias coming out of this new radical feminist, anti-racist, and queer imagination.
Diana, what do you think?
I like so much what just Paul did say eloquently. I don't see any contradiction between being ethical and between being a feminist journalist, because I think it's the core of feminism journalism to be ethical. It's about ethics. It's about what is right to be feminist. Why? We're not basing anything upon wrong information. It's actually the right information, the right dose, and the needed perspective and context to put it in front of the public. Yes, we have to be daring and challenging what people got used to as sacred or as something that we cannot touch. No, that the untouchable should become very touchable. So this is, to me, here being in Lebanon and in the region, what do we have? Religion, we have authoritarian regimes, and we have militants. So challenging those from a perspective journalism is really, really important, and it's very ethical. It's to save the lives of so many thousands and thousands of young women and young queer, young LGBTIQ community from the region from being persecuted and from being just cornered and taken out of the public discourse. So to me, it's very ethical. Yes, we have to be part of the conversation using all new technologies, social media, new media forms. It's not only about informing, it's not about stating the facts. Our journalism is based on facts, but it has to be bold, it has to be opinionated in a way, just explanatory, to tell the story right. We cannot be just, objective and telling, well, this man killed his daughter, without telling the whole context, that we have laws that are very equitable to men persecuting their daughters or sisters under the so-called name, the so-called honor. So it's not enough just to say the facts. No, we have to tell the story of the victim. We have to take the side of the victim by telling the right information.
Thank you, Diana. And let's listen to Fabiola. And I will add a question to Fabiola is, aside from the original question of whether, a feminist journalist becomes a militant or not and how we should answer that, do you see any feminist journalism in the Latin American region?
Latina.
A ver, en primer lugar, yo creo
Okay, first of all, I think when we talk about journalism, real journalism, at the core of it, you have ethics. And if feminists do journalism and feminist journalism, then ethics will be at the core of our work, ethics in capital letters. The thing is that there are schools of journalism that, well, I think we should start reassessing all of this, because we need to deal with a word that has always terrified us. Revolution. We need a revolution in journalism, in thought. That's why we need, when we talk about bringing down the patriarchy, we are talking about a revolution, because that's rocking the pillars of the system. When we talk in journalism, when we say that journalism is objective, we are lying to ourselves. Being objective has to do with our own subjectivity. If two people saw the same fact, we can interpret it in a different way, because if my colleague is sees everything through the lens of patriarchy and I am a feminist, then our interpretations will be completely different. So I don't believe in neutral or objective journalism. Now, on the other hand, we also have, as feminist journalists, we include the fact that we include the feminist approach, that doesn't mean our journalism is not professional. On the contrary, right now, those without that perspective are the ones not being professional, because we are providing a much wider lens to what we are saying. And of course, we need to insist on context. Without the context, a series of news can disinform instead of inform. So I can disinform with the information I provide. That's
I was about to begin in Spanish. Very interesting. You were going to say, I'm sorry.
Si hay periodismo en la
You
región.
were asking if there's journalism in the region. Yes, there is. There's a lot of unrestlessness, a lot of people who are eager to create it. There have been many interesting experiences. You know, when you experiment, things are okay and they can improve. In Mexico, for example, there have been good experiences in journalism. The CIMAC agency has been working for over 20 years, 25, I think. And its journalism is about women and it's for women. That has a gender approach, of course. There was also a very interesting experience in Argentina, Artemisa Noticias, which didn't last long, but it was a very interesting experience. It was really worthwhile. Also in Catalonia, an experience that is currently active, Pícara, which is a magazine in the Basque Country. Oh, there's also another magazine, I can't remember its name. It's by a colleague of our network in Stockholm. So there are experiences about feminist journalism also in our region. On the radio, Radialistas Apasionados, and actually it was called Radialistas Apasionados with masculine, with generic masculine. And when we met in Bogota in our network, they attended the meeting. And after that, they said, no, we will be radialistas apasionados y apasionadas, meaning that they also included the generic feminine. So there are many interesting experiences. In Colombia, for example, we did a pioneer show, a program with the public channel, or in Bogota. It was called We Are Not Queens, We Are Not Cinderellas. It was about women and their rights, and women were protagonists there. So there are experiences. Of course, we need to sit down and systematize that. Yes, but there are experiences here.
I'd like to take now some of the questions that we were sent. The first one, and I think I'll throw this one to Diana or Paul, whoever wants to take it. Let's do short answers so we can take a few. Has to do with sexism, machism in the Middle East, in the Oriental world, and the West. Is it the same sort of sexism? Is it the same sort of machismo, or is it different? Who would like to take that one? Diana.
Definitely it's there, as in the West, here in the Middle East, but here it's much more legalized, institutionalized, and we have it by the culture. So the fight here is really massive, and it's much easier for you in the West because you have the context, you have sometimes the law that helps, although it's still very much there. I'm not saying it's free from sexism, not at all. We have so many issues that the West is facing, but the problem here is much more complicated, it's much more severe, and it's dangerous. So it's not the same, but the core is there.
Okay, and there's one question that I think will help us talk about male alliances. The question is basically, is the gender approach a feminine approach? And I wanted to throw that out to Paul because you talked about that question when you presented the reader.
Sure. No, this is a great question. I think that that feminism is a politics that centers and recognizes the historical experience and agency of women, but it's also a radical critique of patriarchy that invites all of us in various subject positions to deconstruct the gender binary and sexual normativities and how they build our states, our families, our religions in ways that are repressive and exploitative. So I think just like struggles against racism or against colonialism can invite all kinds of solidarities and alliances, while positioning certain peoples as leaders and as sovereign over their bodies and spaces. Feminism is the same way. It can both continue to center and validate the historical and social experience of women and their political leadership, while also inviting all kinds of alliances that want to deconstruct patriarchy, because it's in everyone's interest to deconstruct the norms and bodies and structures that prop up patriarchy. And this is true, of course, even for cisgendered heterosexual men, because they are captured and extracted by patriarchy in their own ways that produces a kind of sick machismo that is a form of, of social impoverishment that expresses itself through violence. So I think it's feminism. I'm a professor also of feminist studies, but I'm a queer activist and a sex worker activist in my background and my history. So I engage with feminism from particular alliances, but of course, I always understand that the subject of women is privileged and the center of that discourse.
Thank you so much, Paul. And this ties well with next question. The question is the following. It has been sent to us. It's basically, in a world where everything is so polarized and every issue is presented as one side against the other. How can we frame feminist journalism as a win-win situation for all in societies, especially in at the very local level? I don't know if Fabiola would like to begin with that one, or Paul, you'd like to continue, Diana, whoever wants to take this one. Fabiola?
Yo creo que
I think that there's our polarization comes from the fact that feminism has been equal to Satan. So we need to remove Satan from feminism and to truly show that this is something that benefits democracy. And those of us who are Democrats or who are in favor of democracy understand that feminism must have a space and there must be room for feminism in social media and public policies in society. Sometimes the liberal theory talks about gender a bit more because I think it becomes softer than when we talk about feminism. When we talk about women's rights, it's a lot better than if we talk about gender and feminism. So you need to smooth things over for people to like it. But basically, I think what we need to do is work very hard in training, in giving information on what feminism truly is. And many university students have told me, but feminism, on the one hand, there's feminism, and in the other one is machismo. And, that's ignorant. I'm sorry to say that. But what we need to is what we need to do is have an influence on public policies, on government, on media. And so we need to work little by little so that we can then bring down polarization. Women who are currently in power are making the most of our previous fight, our previous battle. That's why they're there. We are trying to bring down this idea that feminism is a demon, is Satan. That's We're trying to make it more didactic. Sometimes we speak and people don't understand us. And it seems like we are in this endogamous debate. And we need to bring this debate to the people. We need to make it more popular, more accessible, more understandable. And then we need to pour our heart into it, to pour our feelings into it, so that it's not seen as cold or as an academic question. We need to put our souls into it so that people, that man from the right, can understand, that kind of people who've always said, well, feminism is this and that. Well, we need to revolutionize that.
Diana, the next question is basically how do we, feminist journalism has such a niche that the question is how do we make sure we're not preaching to the already converted? So how do we go beyond, which is what Fabiola is asking us to do?
It intersects with what just Fabiola said. There is a huge backlash against the concept of feminism. I meet young women who say that they are in favor of women's rights, but they immediately tell me we're not feminists. There is a major misconception about what is feminism, not only in the West, but here in the region. And it's being attacked as a part of Satan, demon, all sorts of negative things. So there is a polarized approach towards feminism. And I think we have to know that it's a long way to go and we have to be very persistent, but at the same time bold in our approach. We cannot escape, but keep talking, keep having the conversation, keep covering the stories from this perspective. It's not about backing off, it's about being more and more bold, being more and more patient in explaining what is feminism, what it is, how it is needed, and how to cover the stories from this perspective. It's not about just shaping the public opinion. It's about converting who those do not believe in what you preach for.
I'd like to ask you a final question before we go to the three of you. Do you think that so far of the feminist journalism that we are seeing, the cases Fabiola mentioned, the case, the feminist journalism, poll studies, the feminist journalism Diana practices every single day. Do you think they have enough impact to produce social change? Are they having impact? How far are they going? So if we begin with Professor, just a few words before we go. Paul.
Thanks. I think it's an incredibly exciting time if we think of the transformations of public discourse and the public sphere, thinking of journalism as this whole new realm of media interventions, the way in every region, whether it's Egypt, Lebanon, Brazil, Colombia, in the past few years, there's been many experiments with developing new ways to talk about transgender issues, to talk about sex work issues, to talk about morality. But I think journalists also have to be very aware that there's also a mobilization gets stronger and stronger of religious actors, of missionary actors, who are growing much more sophisticated in their own engagement with journalism and with mainstream media and social media, evangelicals, Pentecostals, new sectarian actors, whose entire set of religious concerns seems to revolve exclusively around gender and sexuality issues. Its theology is almost 100% about gender, sexuality, and the racialization of gender and sexuality. So I think journalism needs both to open itself to the creativity of the new social media, which is non-binary, it's queer, it's inventive, but also to track very carefully the adversary, the new missionary media, the new journalism attached to new sectarian and religious transnational movements, because I think that's what's shaping discourse, including in the Middle East, for sure. Not old traditions, but new forms, whether it's Christian or sectarian or Wahhabi, discourse that's new, only from the generation before. So I think we have to keep up, but I think that this is a super exciting moment.
I think the amount
Thank you.
of backlash, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was going to give you.
The amount of backlash against feminism proves that there is an impact already. If you look at any new platform, when Clubhouse was launched a few months ago, if you look at the Clubhouse from the Arab perspective, so many rooms were dedicated to demonize feminism and preach against it. So the impact is there. Go on any discussion, you will find people trying to warn women from being feminists, because the impact has already penetrated several layers of society, mainly the young, the new ones. So I think the impact is there. We need to build on it.
Thank you, Diana. Fabiola?
Sí, yo estoy de acuerdo con que
I agree with the fact that we need impact, and impact is not the same in mass media and alternative media. And this means that we have a different pronged approach and task to do. The J chapter of the Beijing platform talks about giving access to women to media ownership. And this is something that has not been achieved yet. And this is something that, then this is a battle that we need to fight for. We need to keep working with journalists that are active in the mass media. We need to be in touch with media directors, with media outlet directors. We need to expand our vision so we're not always talking to the same people. And how do we do it? Well, that's where creativity comes in, and on how to do things and what to do. I think that we also need to think about having an influence on public policies that are carried out regarding communication, mass media, and the powers of and the schools of journalism and communication. We need to talk to the deans, to the heads of the universities. Here in Colombia, we have achieved some progress. I mean, we cannot celebrate like we won the war, but we have won some battles, and the network of journalists has approached schools of universities and secretariats of different governments. And we have also worked with the presidential's office in certain moments. And we have, thanks to international cooperation, we have won some battles, but we need to have an influence with among decision makers. And we need many feminist women to be in a position to make decisions.
We come to the end. Thank you so much for helping us understand the reach and the benefits of feminist journalism. Thank you, Fabiola. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Paul. I hope we will be able to meet once we get over this pandemic. I hope everyone over there is well and healthy. Here at IMS, we will continue supporting our partners who decide to go this way. We will help them revolutionize journalism, as Fabiola says. So anyone who chooses so, we will be there, Diana. We just published our annual report. Our work can be read online. You can check mediasupport.org. The link will be published in the chat. You can see our work there. Thanks to all of us who accompanied us to this point. We will continue talking about this. We think it's important. That's our commitment, and we'll continue discussing this. So everyone, have a good evening or a good day, depending where you are.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Ciao.